The first thing I heard was the click, sharp, metallic, intimate, in a way gunfire never was. A flame bloomed in the dark, held low in a man's hand. For 1 second, it lit the black iron gate, the stone saints on the wall beyond it, and the face of the man standing between me and whatever had been chasing us through Palermo. He was taller than the gate should have allowed. That was my first stupid thought. Not because he was impossibly large, but because the night bent around him like it had made room on purpose. Black coat, open collar, no wasted movement. Men with rifles stood half a step behind him and somehow made him look calmer, not safer. My knees hit the wet stone. Lucia made a sound behind me. Small, swallowed, trying so hard to be brave that it broke something in my chest. I reached back without looking until my fingers found her wrist. Tiny bones. Trembling. Real. "Please," I said. I had planned better words while I was running. I had rehearsed names, debts, threats, pieces of truth. They were all gone now, bled out somewhere between the cathedral square and the cliff road. The man with the lighter lowered his gaze to the blood on my dress, then to my hand wrapped around Lucia's wrist. Not my face. Not my mouth. My hand. Rain ticked softly off the iron bars. The sea below the cliff crashed hard enough to shake the silence. "Who sent you here?" he asked. His voice was low, flat, Sicilian, but thinned by long years of not needing to say much. "My father." I swallowed. Copper flooded my tongue. "Before he died." That moved something in the men behind him. Not him. He only closed the lighter with a second click that sounded final. Name. Elena Viscari. I dragged in a breath that hurt. "Hide my little sister. They're coming to kill her before dawn." Behind me, Lucia whispered. "Lena." I squeezed her wrist so she would stop talking. If I heard fear in her voice, I would start shaking, and if I started shaking, I would never stop. The man's gaze shifted to her. 13. White-faced. Mud on her hem. A ribbon, still tied badly in her braid from school that morning. Back when morning had meant something ordinary. Then he looked at me again. Rain slid from my lashes. Blood ran warm along my side under the coat I'd stolen from a dead man in an alley, 2 streets from the harbor. I could feel it reaching the waistband of my skirt. "I can pay," I lied. One of the armed men actually laughed. Quietly, respectfully. Like he knew desperation when he heard it. The dark-haired man in front of me did not smile. "With what?" My father left. I broke off because the world tilted. Black spots touched the edges. I held Lucia harder. "Whatever you want, just not her. Please." He stepped closer then. And every man near the gate went still in that particular way. Dangerous men do when someone more dangerous moves first. I smelled cold air on him. Leather. Smoke. Something clean and expensive with a hard edge underneath it, as if he had been standing outside a grave instead of at his own gate. The flame came back. He flicked the lighter again and held it near my face. I should have flinched. I didn't. There wasn't enough room left in me for that. His eyes were dark enough to make color feel unnecessary. A scar cut clean through one eyebrow. He steadied the blood at my temple, the split skin across my knuckles, the way I kept my body angled even now, so Lucia was hidden behind me. "Look at me," he said. I was already doing that. "No," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was refusing. Fear. Weakness. The need to faint before he answered. For the first time, something almost human moved in his expression. Not softness. Never that. Recognition, maybe. Or irritation that I had brought something into his night. He hadn't ordered. "Little storm," he murmured. So quietly I thought I imagined it. Then, to the men behind him, "Open the gate." Relief hit so hard it felt like another wound. I nearly folded. The iron gate groaned inward. One of his men moved toward Lucia. I jerked, dragging her behind me harder. "No." "Enough," the man with the lighter said. I didn't let go. He looked at my hand again. No one in that moment, not the guards, not the sea, not even my panicked heartbeat, felt as loud as his silence. Your sister goes in, he said. So do you. And then? A stupid question. But if I died without asking it, I would hate myself all the way down. His gaze rested on me long enough for the answer to become unbearable. Then we see if your father bought you one night, he said. They moved us through the gate. Warm light spilled from arched windows inside the walls. The house beyond had once been a monastery, maybe longer ago a fortress, now remade into something harder to name. Stone courtyards, lanterns burning gold, men stationed under saint statues holding rifles where candles should have been. I stumbled. Strong fingers closed around my elbow before I hit the ground. Too warm, too steady. He let go the instant my balance returned, as if holding me 1 second longer might mean something he refused to allow. What's your name? I asked. A guard looked scandalized by the question. Lucia, still clinging to me, seemed to stop breathing. The man turned his lighter over once in his hand. Dante Salvatore. I knew the name, of course. Everyone in Palermo did. People said it carefully. Like a prayer said wrong. My stomach dropped clear through my body. I had come to the one gate in Sicily that was safest and worst in equal measure. Dante glanced toward the blood dripping off the hem of my skirt onto his stone. Get Dr. Moretti, he said. And Rosa. A broad-shouldered man jogged off. Another opened a side door. I heard tires then. Faint. Down on the road below. More than one car. My pulse became a scream. They found us. Dante listened for 1 beat, 2, then tucked the lighter back into his pocket. Not yet. You don't understand. No, he said. You don't. He nodded once. The gate began to close. Lucia buried her face in my shoulder. I watched the gap narrow, watched the wet black road disappear inch by inch, watched the night get shut outside, and something inside me understood before the lock slid home. My old life had ended at the threshold. I woke to linen that smelled like sun, though the room itself smelled of stone and old rain. For 1 stupid second I forgot everything. The ceiling above me was high and painted with saints, faded thin at the edges. A narrow balcony door stood open to gray morning. Somewhere beyond it, gulls cried over the sea. My side burned when I moved. Then Lucia's name slammed back into me so hard I sat up too fast. Pain flashed white. A hand caught my shoulder before I fell back. Madonna, a man said, if you tear your stitches before breakfast, Yana will use my spine as embroidery thread. He was maybe 30. Handsome in a slightly unfortunate way, with the worried eyes of a good man trapped in terrible employment. Dark curls, rolled sleeves, a silver watch, and the expression of someone who had already had too little sleep and too much trouble. Lucia, I said, alive, annoyed, eating toast like a tiny queen. He offered me a glass of water. Teo Belandi, logistics, transport, occasional emotional support animal. I stared at him. He sighed. That joke kills in the kitchen. You're weak from blood loss. I'll try again later. I took the water. My hand shook. Where is she? With Rosa, 2 doors down, safe. He squinted at the tray on the bedside table. And that, tragically, is my breakfast. Boiled eggs with no salt. If I die here, tell Gianna I loved her. And that Rosa murdered me for rejecting butter. Despite myself, I looked at the tray. It held exactly the saddest eggs I had ever seen. You work for a mafia boss, I said, and this is what terrifies you. You've clearly never met Rosa Ferrante. Tio lowered his voice. She once made a bishop cry over overcooked lamb. We all have our thresholds. The bedroom door opened before I could answer. Dante didn't stride into rooms. He altered them. That was worse. He wore charcoal today, no jacket, just a dark shirt rolled at the forearms. The scar in his eyebrow made him look more severe in daylight, not less. Men said power was loud. They lied. Sometimes it was a man entering a room and every other person instinctively moving half an inch away from center. Tio straightened. Boss. Dante glanced at the breakfast tray. Still alive? Barely. Rosa is punishing me because Gianna said my blood pressure is high. Your blood pressure is high because you lie for sport. Tio pointed at him like this proved something and then seemed to remember. I was there. See? No empathy in this house? Out, Dante said. Teo put a hand over his heart. I leave this room unappreciated, underseasoned, and alone. At the door he paused. Your sister asked if she could throw a vase at anyone who came near her. That felt relevant. Then he slipped out, and the room got quieter than before. Dante looked at the bandage visible above my borrowed nightdress. How bad? You tell me. Your doctor stitched me. She said the knife missed anything important. Encouraging. His gaze rested on my face a second too long. Not tender. Measuring. You came to my gate with blood on you and a child behind you. Encouraging was never part of the night. I pushed the blanket aside. I want to see Lucia. You will. That tone calm, settled, already decided stripped patience out of me faster than fear had. You don't get to say that like it's a favor. No? He moved closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to make breathing feel conspicuous. You crossed my wall before dawn, Elena. Everything in this house is now my concern. I hated how that landed. I hated even more that some ruined part of me relaxed at it. My father told me if anything happened, I was to come here. I held his gaze because looking away felt like losing ground. I did. We're here. So now tell me what you want. Dante said nothing at first. Wind pushed the balcony curtains inward. Somewhere down the hall, a door shut, heavy enough that I felt it through the mattress. Truth, he said. I laughed once, thin and ugly. In your house. His eyes narrowed a fraction. I had the wild impression I had surprised him, and that was somehow more dangerous than if I had insulted him. Your father worked for whom? I thought the diocese. My mouth went dry. Now I think. Maybe more than that. What did he leave you? I thought of the little gilt prayer box sewn into the lining of my coat. Dr. Moretti had taken the bloody clothes. If she found it, I don't know. That was not exactly a lie. I knew what he'd shoved into my hands while my mother bled on the kitchen tile. I did not yet know what it meant. Dante watched me the way men like him probably watched fuse wires burn. Lucia stays in the East Wing, he said, with Rosa and Gianna nearby. She does not walk the grounds alone. You do not leave your room without an escort. You do not use the house phones. You do not ask the guards their names. That's absurd. It's a rule. I swung my feet to the floor. Marble kissed my bare soles with cold so sharp it made my stitches throb. I didn't come here to be caged. No. He finally looked at my hands, the scratches across the knuckles, the cut crescent in my palm where broken glass had bitten deep. You came here because someone killed one parent and wants the other thing you love. That took the air out of me. His face did not change. Mine betrayed me completely. I hated that too. You know nothing about me, I said. I know you didn't ask me to save you first. The room held still. So did I. He had noticed. Of course he had. Men like Dante Salvatore miss nothing except mercy. Where is Lucia? I asked, softer now. He stepped aside. Down the hall, 5 minutes. I stood too quickly again and swayed. His hand caught my forearm. Warm, strong, gone almost at once. Almost. I hated that I noticed the exact place his fingers had been. At the door, he waited for me to move first. Control disguised as courtesy, or maybe the reverse. When we stepped into the corridor, I heard the heavy outer lock click somewhere far below in the house. The sound ran through the walls like a message. I looked toward the stairwell, toward the light slanting through barred windows, toward the men stationed at both ends of the hall. Dante followed my gaze. Those doors lock from the outside, he said. He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded certain. Lucia was playing chess with a man who looked like he had shot people professionally and disliked losing to children. That was the first thing I saw when Rosa opened the sitting room door. The second was my sister's face. Alive really was a kind of beauty. Her skin had color again. Her braid had been redone badly by someone without daughters. She sat cross-legged in a huge armchair, chin lifted at the board between her and a hard-faced man in a navy suit. "Check," she announced. The man stared down at the pieces with the expression of someone discovering faith against his will. Rosa Ferrante laughed from beside me, small, sturdy, silver-haired, wearing a black dress and apron like a widow who had decided not to bother dying. "I told you not to underestimate children, Luca." Luca grunted. Lucia saw me then and launched herself up. I barely had time to brace before she hit me. Pain tore through my side and I made a sound I tried to swallow, but I would have let my body split open before I pushed her away. "You came," she whispered into my shoulder. It was such a child sentence. It wrecked me. "Of course I came. You were asleep forever. It was 6 hours. That's forever when people are trying to kill you. Fair point." Rosa pressed a hand to Lucia's back. "No squeezing, unless you'd like Gianna to stitch your sister twice for the price of one." Lucia released me enough to look up. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She had always cried in private, furious at being witnessed. "I beat him twice, I can see that." Luca stood, scar down his jaw, thick wrists, the patient cruelty of a man who did the ugliest jobs neatly. He nodded once to me. Not warm, not rude. "You shouldn't be walking," he said. And yet, something like approval flickered and was gone. That became the shape of the day. Men with edges. Women who had survived by refusing to soften. Dante's world revealed itself not in confessions but in functions. Rosa ran the kitchen and half the house besides. Dr. Gianna Moretti ran the infirmary and, from what I could tell, Teo's entire nervous system. Luca oversaw outer security. Teo ran transport schedules, cameras, and complaints. By afternoon, I was restless enough to make bad choices. Rosa found me in the corridor outside a locked library door. "I was looking for air," I said. "You were looking for answers," she corrected. "Air is on the west terrace. Answers are harder." She shouldered open a smaller side room instead. "Sit there, if you must be impossible." It had once been a chapel sacristy. Cabinets lined the walls. A long oak table stood under a window facing the sea. On it lay bundles of old papers, a broken icon, and 3 ledgers so worn the leather had gone almost silky. I stopped breathing for a second. "You keep archives in a room with salt air?" I demanded. Rosa blinked. That was unexpected. I crossed to the table on instinct. The ledgers were 19th century at least. One binding was split. Another had water bloom on the boards. The broken icon Madonna and Child, painted on wood, had a diagonal crack through the blue of the Virgin's robe. "My father would have fainted," I murmured. Rosa folded her arms. "Your father worked with old papers. I restore manuscripts for the diocesan archive." I touched the split hinge of the nearest ledger with reverence before I remembered whose house I was in. Or did. 2 days ago, I had a desk and a kettle and a landlord who thought I owned too many shoes. Rosa made a soft sound. Not pity. Acknowledgement. "This room belonged to Donna Teresa," she said. "Dante's mother. She kept the family papers herself. No one has touched them properly since she died." I looked up. "Why show me this?" "Because frightened girls pace holes into my floors. Better to give the nervous ones something breakable." I smiled before I could stop it. Rosa's eyes sharpened as if storing that away. I spent the next hour cleaning surface dust with a soft brush Rosa produced from nowhere, rewrapping a ledger spine in temporary linen tape, and staring at the cracked icon until an idea formed. There were gold pigments in a cabinet, rabbit glue, fine brushes, old but serviceable. When I asked, Rosa shrugged. "If you can mend saints, mend one." So I did. The work steadied my pulse. Thin gold traced the crack without hiding it. Not perfection. Survival. Lucia sat nearby reading, occasionally glancing up to make sure I remained visible. "You always get quiet when you're scared." she said without looking at me. Rosa snorted from the doorway. So does he. I turned too quickly. Dante was standing there. I hadn't heard him enter. That bothered me more than it should have. His gaze moved from Lucia to the ledgers, then to the icon under my hand. The room had gone utterly still. She restored a book spine this morning, Rosa said, without being asked, then insulted my storage conditions. They are insulting, I muttered. Dante came to the table. He didn't touch the icon. He looked at the gold seam running through the saint. You left the fracture visible. If you erase every break, I said, you erase the proof it survived. For 1 second, his composure shifted, barely, but I saw it. Lucia, unaware of the cliff-edge silence she had wandered into, said, Lena says paper remembers everything, even when people try to scrape it away. Dante's attention moved to her, then back to me. Does it? Sometimes, I said. He slid a sheet from his pocket and laid it beside my hand. Old paper, familiar ink. My father's handwriting hit me like a slap. I looked up so fast my chair legs scraped stone. Where did you get this? From my archive, Dante said. The question is why your father wrote my mother's name in the margin 20 years ago. The room tilted without blood loss this time. Lucia said my name quietly. Rosa sent her out with a hand to the shoulder and a look that made the girl obey without argument. The door shut. I stared at the page. Notes in my father's compact, elegant script. Shipment numbers. Dates. And in the margin, 1 line underlined twice. Before dawn. Never again. Dante saw me read it. Tell me what he hid, he said. Outside, somewhere below the cliff road, a car engine cut off and did not start again. Someone had found the walls. By evening, the whole house had changed temperature. Nothing obvious. No shouted orders. No boots thundering through halls. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, the men got quieter. Doors opened and closed faster. Luca stopped pretending my presence didn't matter and started posting guards in pairs. Even the kitchen felt sharpened. Rosa cooked with her mouth set in a line that made Teo cross himself before stealing olives. Why is everyone acting like thunder with no rain? I asked him while Lucia did schoolwork at the far end of the table. Teo leaned close and whispered, because when Luca stops swearing, something terrible is usually on a schedule. That is not helpful. I know. It's a gift. He eyed the tray Rosa set in front of him. Steamed fish, greens. No visible joy. You see this? He asked me mournfully. This is not lunch. This is a medical experiment. From the stove, Rosa said, without turning. Eat it, or I'll tell Gianna you called her ankles forgettable. Teo clutched his chest. Cruelty. Defamation. Also, I never said that because her ankles are poetry. Despite everything, I laughed. It came out rusty from disuse. Lucia smiled over her notebook. The kitchen loosened for 3 whole seconds. Then Dante walked in, and all the E's folded neatly away. He didn't look at Teo. Courtyard. Now. I rose on instinct. Lucia stays here, Rosa said, already moving to my sister's chair. With me. I followed Dante outside. The inner courtyard had once been cloistered and holy. Now its fountain basin was dry and armed men stood beneath fig trees clipped too precisely to be anything but expensive control. The air smelled of wet leaves and gun oil. Dante stopped near the fountain. Your father carried accounts for my mother for 6 years. I saw the page. He also disappeared from our books after my sister died. Something in the way he said my sister made the space behind my ribs ache. Not because he asked for sympathy. Men like him never ask for that. Because he said it as if the words still had teeth. I don't understand, I said. You don't understand a lot. Anger flared, useful because it kept grief from drowning me. Then explain one thing. His jaw shifted. My mother trusted your father. That is why you were let through my gate. Not because of me. Of course not. I should have expected the disappointment and still it stung. But that isn't why you kept Lucia, I said. Something unreadable crossed his face. No. I took one step closer before caution could stop me. Then why? The courtyard held its breath. Dante reached into his pocket. The lighter clicked open. Flame. Gold against gathering dusk. He watched it for a beat, then closed it again. Because you asked for her first. The truth landed between us, stark enough to make me forget how to move. I don't, you will. A crack split the air. Not thunder. Luca shouted something. Men moved. Dante hit me before fear did. One brutal shove, my back struck stone. His body covered mine. A second crack, then a third. Sniper. I understood it only after the world had already changed shape. His hand locked at the side of my throat, not choking, pinning, protecting the vulnerable line there, as fragments snapped off the fountain behind us. His other arm braced by my head, the whole of him turned into shield and weight and cold control. Stay down, he said into my hair. I could smell smoke on his collar. Metal, the faint clean scent I had noticed the night before, now cut with adrenaline. My own pulse thrashed against his palm. Men shouted in Italian from the other wall. A gun answered from somewhere beyond the olive trees. Luca returned fire. Teo yelled, "If I die on boiled fish, I will haunt every one of you," which would have been absurd anywhere except here, where absurdity and terror had apparently signed a treaty. Dante lifted his head a fraction, listening. His expression did not change. That was the worst part. Violence found him and discovered he had already made a home for it. Another shot. Closer. His hand tightened once at my throat, not enough to hurt. Enough to command. My body obeyed before my mind could object. Almost. His mouth was near my temple. Too near. Not touching. The air between us felt dangerous in a way the rifles did not. Then it was over as suddenly as it began. One of Dante's men shouted that the shooter was down. Boots pounded. Luca swore magnificently in 3 dialects. Teo shouted for Gianna and then added, "For the record, I was extremely brave." Dante straightened slowly. His hand left my throat last. I sat up. My lungs forgot themselves. "You're bleeding," I said. A nick along his jaw, bright against olive skin. Nothing, but it was the only blood on him I could see, and my brain fixed on it like that made sense. "It isn't mine in any way that matters. You were shot at." I noticed. His calm snapped something in me. "Do you hear yourself?" Constantly. Luca came through the archway breathing hard. Dead. Amateur with a good scope. No papers. "Send his hands to Vittorio," Dante said. I stared at him. He looked at me as if my horror were predictable weather. Maybe it was. "No," I said quietly. "You don't get to stand over me like..." I broke off because what exactly had he done? Saved my life. Terrified me. Made both feel inseparable. And then say things like that. His eyes dropped to my shaking hands. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "This is the world you came to." The sentence should have pushed me back. It didn't. Not fully. "What happened to your sister?" I asked, before sense intervened. Everything in the courtyard went still. Even Luca looked away. Dante's face became unreadable in a harder way than before. Not blank. Locked. He bent, picked something from the stone by my hip, and held it up. A bullet fragment. Flattened ugly silver. "When I was 19, he said, "I was asked to choose between reaching her and ending a war." My breath caught. He dropped the fragment into my palm and closed my fingers over it. I chose badly. That was all. It should not have been enough. Somehow, it was too much. Teo appeared at the arch with Gianna behind him and blood on his sleeve that looked, thankfully, not his. "Good news," he announced. "I'm alive." "Bad news. Gianna still doesn't love me." Gianna rolled her eyes. "Move or I will treat you with a chair." For one impossible second, Dante's mouth almost softened. Then he looked at me. At the bullet in my hand, at the place where his fingers had been at my throat, and whatever had nearly surfaced disappeared. "Inside," he said. I went. That night I stopped pretending my father had left me with prayers. The little gilt box had survived the knife, the running, the stitching, and my own fear. Dr. Prinitz, Moretti had returned my clothes folded at the foot of the bed after they were cleaned. I waited until Lucia slept in Rosa's room and the corridor quieted, then sat on the floor under the window with the prayer box in my lap. It was shaped like a pocket shrine. Madonna on the lid, cheap gold paint. My father had pressed it into my palm while my mother gasped on the kitchen tile. If it gets bad, Elena, you go to Salvatore. And you do not trust paper that looks honest. At the time I had thought shock had made him speak nonsense. I slid a knife tip under the inner seam and found the false back. Inside lay 3 strips of folded vellum thin as skin, numbers, initials, harbor times, 1 repeated mark in the margins, a tiny drawn bell. At first it meant nothing. Then I saw the undertext faint, scratched lines beneath the visible ink, as if one list had been written, scraped, and written over again. My training woke up like a struck match. I needed light, lemon juice, heat, patience. I needed the chapel room. I was halfway down the corridor when Dante's voice came out of the dark. Can't sleep? I froze. He was sitting in a chair by the arched window at the end of the hall, half-shadowed, as if he had always been there, and I had only just caught up. Coat off. Lighter in one hand, no guards visible, which meant at least 2 were invisible. What are you doing? I asked. Watching my house? At 2 in the morning? His gaze moved over the box in my hand. That depends. Are you planning to tell me what your father left? I should have. I know that now with the clean cruelty of hindsight. But terror makes misers of people. I had one thing. One. And in his house, surrounded by his rules, some animal part of me needed to keep a corner of choice. I'm going to find out first, I said. His eyes narrowed. Elena, I'm not lying. You're not telling the whole truth. Neither are you. Silence again. That devastating economy of his. Say less. Let the other person bleed, filling the space. Then he stood. Come. The chapel room smelled of old wood and salt. Dante turned on only the desk lamp. Gold light pooled over the vellum strips. He watched while I mixed weak lemon solution, brushed the surface lightly, and held the page near warmth. Brown script rose like a bruise from beneath the top layer. Dante went very still. What is it? I whispered. Names, not shipment names. Children's names. Rows of initials beside ages. Ports. Buyer's marks. My stomach turned so hard I had to grip the table. This isn't smuggling. No, the world narrowed to the page. My father had not been keeping tax fraud. He had been recording children moved through Salvatore-controlled routes years ago, routes someone later scrubbed, layered over with harmless cargo manifests. One set of hands built the lie. Another tried to leave the truth underneath. There was a bell mark next to one line. Bianca Salvatore, age 12. I looked at Dante. He was already looking at it. I thought she was kidnapped, I said, and instantly knew how stupid that sounded. Kidnapping was the soft word used after powerful families paid newspapers. She was. Then why is her name here? His jaw locked. The lighter clicked open once, shut again. Because someone sold the root. The room got colder. I traced the edge of the hidden script. My father found this. He helped bury it, Dante said. I flinched. No, you don't know that. My father wasn't a saint? He asked softly, glancing at the restored icon. No, he worked for them long enough to learn what surviving costs. Anger hit because grief had no floor. He died trying to get Lucia and me out, and yet you still hid this from me. The words landed clean, deserved. I lifted my chin, because I don't know if you're in it. His gaze turned flat as winter water. Fair. Cruel. True. For 1 second I thought he might throw me out, or worse, simply stop caring whether I stayed. Instead he set both hands on the table and leaned in. Not close enough to touch. Close enough that my breath shortened anyway. If I were in it, he said, each word precise, You and your sister would never have reached the gate. It was not a defense. It was worse. It was fact. I looked down first. That felt like losing. The lamp threw gold across the restored icon propped near the wall. The crack I had gilded gleamed softly. Dante followed my gaze. Why did you mend that? Because Rosa asked. That isn't an answer. I swallowed. Because leaving it broken felt like surrender. Something passed through his expression then, so fast I nearly missed it. Wariness, maybe. Or recognition so deep it frightened him. A sound snapped from the corridor. Not loud. Enough. Dante moved before I turned my head, gun in hand from nowhere. He crossed the doorway in silence. I heard one grunt. One body hit stone. Luca's curse, then Teo's offended voice. If I wanted to die sneaking pastries, I would at least choose better pastries. Dante reappeared dragging Teo by the collar. Teo held a wrapped cantaloupe in one hand and zero shame in his face. Before anyone overreacts, this is for Gianna. Medically. Sugar supports morale. Luca stepped in behind him, expression murderous. He tripped the hallway censor. With grace, Teo said. No one laughed. Even Teo saw it a beat later. His gaze dropped to the vellum, the names. Oh, he said quietly. Dante looked at Luca. No one, in or out without my order. Luca nodded and left. Teo hesitated, then set the cantaloupe on the table like an offering at a grave and backed out. When the room emptied again, Dante was still holding the gun low at his side. I should have told you sooner, I said. Yes, I was trying to protect Lucia. And instead you delayed me. The truth of it bit so deep I almost sat down. He looked at the page again. Someone inside this house knew to search the outer walls tonight. You think there's a traitor? I know there is. The lamp hissed softly. Sea wind touched the shutters. Between us lay hidden ink, dead children, and the first real thing I had given him since the gate. It wasn't trust. It was evidence. War announced itself with shattered glass. 1 minute Lucia was reciting verbs in Rosa's kitchen while Teo argued that olives counted as hydration. The next, every window on the western side of the house exploded inward. Rosa got Lucia down before the sound finished forming. I dropped with them, heart punching my throat. Men shouted. A second blast hit the outer wall. Dust rained from the ceiling. Keller! Luca barked from the doorway. Dante appeared through smoke and falling plaster like violence had called him by name. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dragged the heavy oak table over Rosa and Lucia, and turned to me. Move. I did. He shoved me toward the back stair. Gunfire ripped somewhere above us. We hit the stone corridor just as the lights cut out. Emergency lamps glowed red. Alarm bells began to pulse low through the house. Not frantic. Rhythmic. Somehow worse. Dante kept one hand at the back of my neck, steering, shielding. I could feel the force he was not using. The control inside the urgency. Men ran past us heading the other way, each of them glancing once at him and never twice. We reached the cellar landing. Gianna was already there with a med kit. Rosa dragged Lucia into the old wine room. Teo stumbled in after them carrying 3 rifles, a radio, and, absurdly, a bag of almonds. Protein, he panted at my stare. If I'm trapped underground, I refuse to be nutritionally irresponsible. No one answered him. A shot cracked close. Dante spun, firing back up the stairwell before I even understood there was a target. A body hit stone above us. Another man shouted. Luca's voice answered from somewhere unseen. I grabbed the rail because my legs had started shaking too late. Dante reloaded with terrifying ease. How many? I asked. Enough. That's not an answer. It's the only one you get. He started up again. I caught his sleeve. I didn't mean to. My body simply refused the idea of him vanishing into that noise. Heat slammed from his skin to mine to the blood-spattered fabric. He looked down at my hand. Time bent. He could have pulled free immediately. He didn't. Almost. Dante. His eyes met mine. Red light. Stone walls. Smoke in the air. Everything in me too loud. What? The real question sat behind my teeth. I don't know what happens to this house if you die in it, and I hate that I care. But I couldn't say it. Not then. So I said the smaller truth. Come back. Something moved in his face. Not softness, something more dangerous because it had once wanted to be. Then he freed his sleeve gently like my grit mattered. I intend to. He went. I stood on the steps listening to the house tear at itself. Lucia cried once silently. A terrible child habit she had when fear got too large. Gianna checked weapons. Rosa prayed under her breath in Sicilian so old it sounded carved from rock. Teo opened the almond bag and whispered, "If I survive this, I'm eloping with salt." Minutes or hours later, Ward changes clocks. I heard boots returning fast. Dante appeared with blood on his hands, his shirt torn at the shoulder. "Luca's hit," he said to Gianna. "Upper arm. Stable." Gianna shoved past him up the stairs with her bag. "It's not his blood," Dante said to me before I could ask. I had not realized my eyes had gone there first. He noticed everything. I was beginning to understand that as a form of doom. By dawn, the attack was over. 3 dead outside the west wall, 2 inside, 1 missing. Renato Vieri's message arrived with the sunrise, a severed bell clapper wrapped in oilcloth on the courtyard steps. I stared at it, nausea climbing. Dante looked at the iron piece as if it had spoken aloud. "He knows we found the ledger." "Renato," I said, "your foster brother." I had heard enough from Rosa. Enough from Luca's clipped curses. Enough from old Palermo whispers I hadn't believed. Boys raised together in a church-run orphan house after 2 blood-soaked family purges. One became Dante Salvatore. The other became the man mothers named to make children stop wandering. "He wants Lucia," I said. "He wants what she can prove. And if he can't have that..." Dante's gaze lifted to me. "Then he'll settle for breaking what I protect." The sentence hung there, terrifying in what it included. Later, when the house had stopped bleeding and the sky had gone white with exhaustion, I found him alone in the lower chapel. No guards. No audience. Just stone saints, old candle wax, and Dante sitting on the front pew with his forearms on his knees. The cracked lighter rested in his hand. He didn't look up when I entered. "You should sleep." I tried. "That wasn't an invitation." "I know." I sat beside him anyway. For a while there was only the sea below the cliff and the tiny metallic roll of the lighter against his thumb. Click, shut, click, shut. Finally I said, "I'm afraid of you." His mouth curved without humor. "Good." I twisted my fingers together. "That isn't the worst part." He turned then. The chapel swallowed the distance between us. Not physically. Something worse. Understanding. "The worst part," I whispered, staring at the cold floor because looking at him felt impossible, "is that I'm not only afraid of you." Silence. Then the lighter stopped moving. I felt his hand under my chin, lifting carefully, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. That choice cost me something. I still don't know what to call it. He looked at me like he did not kiss me in the chapel. That was the first cruelty of mourning. Dante's hand stayed under my chin for 1 suspended second, his thumb warm against skin gone too aware, his eyes fixed on mine with a kind of restraint that felt more intimate than any touch I had known. Then he let me go. He stood. He put the lighter back in his pocket. He said, "Lock your door tonight." And because he was Dante Salvatore, because he could turn a woman inside out and call it a security measure, he walked out before I remembered how to speak. By sunrise, I hated him a little for that. By noon, I hated myself more. The house had not slept. Men moved through it with fresh bandages and loaded rifles. Stone corridors smelled of bleach over blood. Coffee boiled too long. And the cold mineral damp that climbed from the cliff in bad weather. Lucia stayed close enough that I could feel her looking for me before I heard her. And everywhere, underneath the noise of a fortress preparing for another attack, I kept remembering the moment in the chapel when he could have kissed me and did not. Almost. Again, it was making me reckless. "You're staring at walls," Teo told me in the kitchen, balancing an espresso in one hand and a folded route map in the other. He looked pale, underslept, and deeply offended by existence. That's how ghost possession starts. I'm thinking, no, that face is worse than thinking. That face means you're about to make a noble decision that ruins everyone's afternoon. Rosa set a plate in front of Lucia and another in front of me. Warm bread, ricotta, honey, I could barely taste. Eat first, she said. Sacrifice later. Lucia picked at the crust. If we stay here, more people get hurt. The room went quiet. Tio looked at me, then away. That was the thing about children in dangerous houses. They learned too quickly which truths adults wanted to step around. No one is hurting because of you, I said. Lucia's eyes flashed. That's a lie. It was. Worse, she knew it. I folded my hands in my lap so she wouldn't see them shake. Luca was upstairs having his bandage changed because he had taken a bullet for a stairwell Dante refused to lose. 2 guards had died overnight. A woman from Gianna's staff had gone home to her family and would never come back because this house had become a target, and all of it was circling us. Circling me, because my father had hidden something, because I had hidden it longer, because Renato Vieri wanted what came through my hands. I can get her out, I heard myself say. Rosa turned. No. It came too fast for her to have considered it, which meant she already had. That frightened me. Not permanently, I said. Just somewhere quieter, somewhere no one would think to look first. Teo set down his cup. That sentence has historically gone very badly in this house. But I was already thinking of routes, service roads, harbor traffic, church safe houses my father once used for document transfers. Patterns. Gaps. I restored broken things for a living. It meant I saw structure where other people saw ruin. And suddenly I saw one now. The fish deliveries, I said. The old supplier entrance below the western wall. Rosa told me they still use it twice a week. Rosa's mouth thinned. I told you too much. The cameras there point inward, I said, turning to Teo. Because the cliff road is too narrow for a turn. Anyone watching the main gate wouldn't see one car leave that way if another truck came in. Teo stared. Lucia sat up straighter. Hope is a dangerous thing on a child's face. It makes adults stupid. No, Rosa said again, sharper now, but Teo was frowning at nothing, which meant he was calculating. In theory, he murmured. In practice, Rosa snapped. Our last practical plan ended with bullets in the walls. I should have stopped then. I know that with the sick clarity only hindsight provides. Dante was in a strategy room with Luca and Gianna. He had not approved this. He would not have approved it. And some disobedient, hurting part of me wanted one thing he had not arranged. Choice. If Lucia leaves for 48 hours, I said, Renato loses his target. He forces himself into the open looking for her. Dante gets room to move. Teo rubbed a hand over his face. That is exactly the kind of logic that gets everyone screamed at by a man in a black coat. Lucia looked between us. I can do it. Rosa muttered something prayer-adjacent and profane. 40 minutes later, I was on the harbor road with my little sister in the back seat and Teo driving like he had made peace with saints but not traffic laws. I had made the mistake. I knew it before the gate had fully opened behind us. Not because Dante found out. He hadn't. Not yet. Because the air itself felt wrong. Palermo spread below us in hard white light and rusted docks. The sea flashed like knives. Teo's jaw stayed locked. Lucia sat too straight, both hands in her lap, trying to look older than 13. I kept checking the side mirror for black sedans, convinced fear could become foresight if I stared hard enough. You can still turn around, Teo said. You can still stop helping me. He gave me a humorless smile. Signorina, I helped because if I didn't, you would have tried it alone, and then Gianna would have had to identify what was left of me from stress alone. We took the lower switchback past the abandoned customs shed. A truck jackknifed across the road ahead. Teo swore. 2 motorcycles came up behind us. Everything inside me went cold. Down! I shouted and threw myself across the seat toward Lucia as gunfire stitched the windshield. Glass burst inward. The car lurched. Tio yanked the wheel hard enough to throw us sideways. The smell of burning rubber and shattered safety glass filled the cabin. Lucia screamed once, high and terrible. Tio slammed us into reverse. One motorcycle clipped the rear quarter panel. Men were already moving around the truck with rifles raised. "Out!" Tio barked. "Rock wall! Move!" He shoved Lucia toward me. We spilled from the passenger side into heat and salt wind and the deafening crack of automatic fire ricocheting off stone. A shot hit the car door inches from my head. Another man dropped before he reached us. Dante. I didn't see where he came from. 1 second, there were killers on the harbor road. The next, Dante Salvatore was between me and all of them, firing with a kind of lethal stillness that made panic look vulgar. Luca was with him, pale under the jaw, one arm strapped tight from yesterday's wound, still moving because men like him did not know how not to. "Get them behind the wall," Dante shouted. Tio grabbed Lucia. I followed, half-crawling, dress torn at the knee, palm scraping gravel. The road smelled of gasoline and brine and gunpowder so thick it turned the back of my throat. Bitter. Then Luca jerked. He made no sound at first. That was the horror of it. He simply staggered, turned as if confused, and blood spread dark across his shirt under the useless sling. "Luca!" I screamed. Dante turned. For one catastrophic second, I saw something tear loose in his face. Not fear, not exactly. Rage with a grave inside it. He crossed the distance to the shooter and put 3 bullets into him so cleanly it felt less like violence than subtraction. Tio dragged Luca behind the wall. Lucia had both hands over her mouth. I dropped to my knees in blood that was too warm to be mine. "Pressure!" Luca ground out. I pressed both hands to his side. Blood forced itself between my fingers. This was my fault. Not in the abstract way survivors blame themselves for weather and bullets. In the direct, unbearable way of cause and effect. I had wanted one unsanctioned choice. One route Dante did not decide for me. One chance to move my sister like I still belonged to the world where plans were made by frightened women in kitchens, instead of armed men in war rooms. And Luca Caruso was bleeding for it on sun-hot pavement. The shooting stopped. Dante came toward us breathing hard. His face splattered red, the cracked silver lighter somehow still in his pocket, as if even chaos could not dislodge it. He looked at Luca. At my hands. At the car. At Teo. Then finally at me. He understood instantly. He always understood instantly. "You took her out," he said. No raised voice, no spectacle, just the truth, laid down like a blade. I thought, yes, he said, that was the problem. He hauled Luca up with Teo's help and got him into the second car that had roared up behind him. Men moved around us. Orders snapped. Sirens wailed somewhere far off, too far to matter. Gianna arrived in the third vehicle, white-faced and furious. She took one look at Luca and started working before the car door shut. Dante turned back to me. The harbor wind drove my hair across my mouth. I tasted salt and blood and shame. "There's a boat leaving in 20 minutes, he said. "Malta, new names. Your sister can be on it." I stared at him. "You can go with her," he added. Lucia made a broken sound. Tio looked from him to me and very deliberately said nothing. There it was, the door, real, open. Costly. I could leave the fortress, leave the guns, leave the man who made danger feel like shelter and shelter feel like sin. I could take my sister and become someone smaller, safer, thinner. I could save what remained of the life I had imagined. Paper dust, quiet rooms, work that only bled at the fingertips. Dante met my eyes without softness. "If you stay," he said, "you stay, knowing what this costs." I looked at Luca's blood on my hands. Then I looked at Lucia. And then, against every clean future still left to me, I looked back at Dante. "I'm sending her," I whispered. "Not me." His face did not change. That somehow made the choice feel even more real. I kissed Lucia's forehead with hands that shook, put her into Gianna's care, and watched the car door close on the last innocent version of my life. Then I turned around and walked back toward Dante on my own. I did not stop. By nightfall, the house felt too large without Lucia in it. Children changed the pressure of a place. Even frightened ones, even brave ones pretending not to be. Without her, the corridors of Dante's fortress went back to being what they had been before I crossed the gatestone. Silence, and men carrying violence under their coats like a second spine. I stood in the upper cloister, watching rain turn the courtyard black. Somewhere below, a generator kicked on. Somewhere farther off, the sea hammered the cliff. I had sent my sister away with my own hands and stayed behind for a man who had offered me the last clean exit I would ever get. The knowledge should have made me feel bold. Instead, I felt hollow. You look like someone buried you standing up. I turned. Tio leaned against the arch, one sleeve rolled, a fresh bruise darkening his jaw. He held 2 cups of coffee and the mournful dignity of a man whose day had gone badly but not fatally. "I'm not in the mood," I said. "That has never stopped me." He offered 1 cup. "For the record, Gianna kissed my cheek before leaving for the harbor, and I have decided to make it my entire personality." The laugh caught in my throat and came out bruised. Did she? It may have been because I was bleeding. It may have been pity. We do not investigate miracles too closely in this house. I took the coffee. It was too hot. Bitter. Perfect. Taya looked through the rain. "Boss is in the south office with Vittorio." "The lawyer? Consigliere? Legal cleaner? Human coffin nail?" Yes. I had seen Vittorio Conti only twice since arriving. An elegant man in his 60s with silver at his temples, immaculate suits, and the kind of voice that made confessions sound practical. He had greeted me after the harbor ambush with grave sympathy and a hand pressed over his heart, as if we had met at mass instead of in a fortress under siege. Something tightened low in my stomach. "What?" Tio squinted at me. "That face again. You're doing your suspicious archivist thing. My profession is conservator. Same haunting eyes, better shoes." He drifted off after a minute, muttering about checking exterior cameras and whether surviving gunfire entitled him to salted almonds. I stayed where I was until the rain began to creep under the arch and dampen my sleeves. Then I went to the chapel room. I told myself I wanted work. Something careful. Something that could be mended by hands and patience instead of bullets. But the truth had sharper teeth. I wanted to see the page again. My father's note. The hidden ink. Bianca's name. The lamp clicked on above the oak table. Ledgers, icon, brushes, linen tape. The little world I had made inside Dante's house waited for me, absurdly calm. I touched the restored seam in the icon's robe. Gold under my fingertip. Fracture visible. Survival visible. Then I saw the sheet I had not left there. Heavy cream stationery. Folded once, a dark blue wax seal broken at the edge. I knew the paper before I opened it. A watermark lived in the lower left when held to light. Bell-shaped. Tiny. Precise. The same bell my father had marked throughout the hidden ledger. My pulse dropped into ice. I moved the paper under the lamp. The watermark sharpened. Below it, pressed lightly into the page by the writer's hand, remained ghost lines from another note written above it earlier in the stack. Training took over. I angled the sheet. Breathed. Read the pressure marks. Docks are compromised. Move her before matins. Her. A cold understanding began to build itself piece by piece, not the visible ink. The paper itself. This stationery was too old to be current household stock. Rag content high. Cut from a mill that closed decades ago. Special order, or old private archive. The bell watermark had not been used by any normal stationer in Palermo for years, but it had been used by one place. The Conti family pressworks attached to the old bell foundry above Monreale. I heard the door close behind me. Your father was smarter than I gave him credit for. Vittorio Conti's voice. I did not turn at once. My hand flattened over the page instead, as if I could stop knowledge from spreading by touch alone. When I did face him, he stood with mild eyes and a pistol fitted so neatly in his hand, it looked like an accessory he regretted but had accepted. You sold Bianca, I said. He sighed. That is an inelegant summary. My throat tasted metallic. Did Renato know? Afterward. Before Dante. That was unfortunate. My skin went cold under my dress. Why? Vittorio stepped farther into the room and closed the distance with the patience of someone who had long ago decided panic was for other people. Because Donna Teresa was weakening the family, because mercy is expensive. Because children moved through those routes for years under the protection of men who then knelt in church and spoke of God. His expression barely altered. Your father understood records. He understood where rot settles. He also understood daughters. And you think that makes you sound human? No. He tipped his head. Only honest. I looked past him once, gauging distance to the corridor. He noticed. Of course he did. Do not, he said gently. I dislike clumsy scenes. You're working with Renato? I am finishing what foolish men made necessary. The room seemed suddenly smaller, the air flatter, as if some invisible hand had pressed out all softness. I thought of Dante at 19, of a choice made before dawn, of Renato looking at that choice and building an entire life out of the ugliest possible interpretation of it. Mirror and wound. What do you want from me? The original vellum. Vittorio's gaze dropped to my pocket, where the folded strips had lived all day. And whatever your sister remembers hearing before your father died. I forced myself not to touch my skirt. He smiled faintly. There, that's better. My mistake arrived with perfect clarity then. Harbor Road. Luca's blood. Choice. I had believed I could keep some part of this in my own hands, and all I had done was widen the circle of people who could be hurt by me. Not again. I stepped backward, knocking my hip against the table. Brushes rattled. The restored icon tipped and fell. I caught it by reflex. Vittorio's eyes narrowed. Elena. I set the icon down with deliberate care. My right hand slid behind it, fingers closing over a soft graphite pencil. You know, I said, because sometimes talking is the only weapon left. The problem with old paper is that it remembers pressure. His expression sharpened in annoyance rather than comprehension. Good. Your father said the same thing once, he replied, just before he tried to run. My lungs seized. I looked at the paper, at the hidden bell watermark, at the gold seam in the icon. Then I moved, not toward the door, toward the lamp. I slammed it sideways into the curtains. Darkness dropped half a beat later as the bulb shattered. Vittorio cursed. The first ugly sound I had heard from him. I shoved the icon and stationery together under the ledgers, scrawled one word across the margin of my father's page in brutal pencil strokes, and ran. I made it 3 steps. His hand fisted in my hair and yanked me backward hard enough to light stars behind my eyes. The gun pressed cold beneath my ribs. Enough, he said into my ear. I went still. He dragged me through the service corridor at gunpoint, not hurrying, because men like him survive by rehearsing exits before they need them. We passed a side chapel, then the storage stair, then the old delivery tunnel that smelled of damp stone and rust. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might warn the whole house. No one saw us. Or if they did, they died too fast to matter. At the tunnel mouth, Vittorio tied my wrists with plastic cuffs and searched my pockets. He found the vellum, smiled once, and tucked it away. You should have left on the boat, he said. Rain hit my face as he shoved me into the back of a black car hidden in the lower olive grove. I twisted once, enough to see the fortress windows burning above us like watchful eyes. Then the driver's door opened. Renato Vieri got in. He looked like a story Palermo mothers would tell if they wanted their children afraid of handsome men. Dark hair, black coat, a face that could have belonged beside Dante's in some old church photograph if not for the cruelty worn openly instead of hidden under discipline. He turned, took in my bound hands, and smiled without warmth. Well, he said, he does like the selfless ones. The car rolled into the rain. Too late. The old Dell foundry smelled like wet ash, iron dust, and history left out to rot. They took me through a loading bay where rusted chains still hung from the ceiling and into an office on the second level overlooking the casting floor. cracked windows. One working lamp, a desk scarred by cigarettes, rain moving silver across broken panes. Renato cut the cuffs off my wrists himself. It was not kindness. It was theater. He sat on the desk and watched me rub feeling back into my hands, while Vittorio locked the door and posted 2 men outside. For a long moment, no one spoke. Below us, water dripped steadily into some unseen bucket. The whole building sounded like a clock trying not to die. "You look disappointed," Renato said. I was expecting someone uglier. His laugh came easy, real. "That was worse than if it had been false. I understand why he kept you." "You understand nothing about him." He tipped his head. "No, I understand him better than anyone alive. I should have stayed silent. I know that. But I had spent too many days breathing Dante's restraint. I was tired of being the only one in rooms who still looked frightened. You think being hurt first makes you special." Renato's gaze sharpened. Vittorio said, "Enough," in the tone of a man correcting weather. Renato ignored him. "You know what I think is special? The way you arrived half dead and still offered him the little sister first." His smile thinned. "No one ever handed us anything they loved unless they wanted leverage back. You didn't even ask his terms." My pulse stuttered. So Dante had not imagined the weight of that moment. Renato had seen it too, or understood the kind of wound it would strike. "You were there," I said slowly. "When Bianca was taken." Something moved in his face. Not shame, not quite grief, a scar remembering the knife. "I was there after," he said. "I was there when the house learned to pronounce her name like a funeral. I was there when Dante chose the war table because he believed he could end one thing and still get to her before dawn." The words hit harder because he did not spit them. He laid them down carefully, almost tenderly, the way people do with stories they've told themselves, until they become religion. "And when he didn't?" I asked. Renato smiled at the rain. "Then I learned what men become when power matters more than a girl." "Is that what happened to you?" He looked back at me. "No, Elena. What happened to me is that I learned he and I were the same animal. He just had a mother who loved him long enough to put a ribbon on the throat." The lamp hummed softly. My stomach turned. Mirror, that was the whole horror of Renato. Not that he was monstrous. That pieces of him looked like Dante stripped of conscience and mercy, and the last few hands that had ever touched him with anything but demand. Vittorio laid the vellum on the desk. "The key," he said. "The girl doesn't have it." "She doesn't need it," I said, "because panic makes gamblers of the doomed. I already sent copies." That was a lie. Not a good one. Renato's mouth curved anyway, interested. "Good," he said. "Then when Dante arrives, we can all stop pretending this is only about paper." He left me alone after that, which was their first mistake. Their second was the desk drawer. Old offices collect old things. Wax stubs, bent clips, rusted blades. When the guard outside settled into a rhythm, 3 steps. Pause, 3 steps. I knelt slowly beside the desk, as if I were breaking apart, and slid the drawer open with my bound hands hidden by my body. A bone folder. Useless. 2 sealing needles, a bottle of denatured alcohol gone half syrupy with age. A packet of rag scraps. I almost laughed. I was a conservator. Men like Renato saw paper and thought records. I saw fibers. Adhesives. Fragility. Ways to separate one layer from another without destroying what mattered underneath. I tipped the alcohol onto the plastic tie Vittorio had left hanging loose around one wrist after rebinding me outside the office as a precaution when he realized leaving me free had annoyed him. Cheap material. Old heat in the room. Bad knot. It softened. The guard kept walking. 3 steps. Pause. 3 steps. I worked one sealing needle into the knot and turned it without looking directly at it. My fingers shook only once. When the tie loosened, I did not pull free at once. I waited. Breathed, counted the guard's pattern again. Then I rose, slid the rag scraps and bottle into my sleeve, and moved to the window. Below, on the casting floor, old sand molds lay stacked beneath tarps, bell forms, wooden frames. On the far wall, Faded in gold leaf so worn only a conservator would have noticed, was the Conti emblem, a bell over crossed keys. I knew then where to leave my message. When Dante found the chapel room empty, the lamp broken, and my mother's icon shoved beneath ledgers like a body hidden badly, he did not feel surprise, only the cold confirmation of a fear already breathing beside him. Then he found the word carved into the margin of your father's page in furious pencil, bell N4. One useless second, he saw me at his gate again, bleeding, shaking, still pushing a smaller life toward him before your own. That was when he knew the truth. He had been refusing since the chapel. He would burn the city before he let that silence happen twice. I heard them before I saw them. Gunfire outside. Engines. A shouted order in Sicilian so clipped and cold it might as well have been a knife entering bone. Dante. The foundry woke all at once. Men running. Vittorio cursing. Renato laughing softly as if someone had arrived right on schedule. I shoved the rag scraps into the cracked wall emblem, soaked them with alcohol, and struck the working lamp against the metal window latch until the filament sparked. Tiny flame. Enough. Smoke began to curl up around the bell mark, black on gold. If Dante came through this building, he would see where old things had been disturbed. He would read the damage the way I did. The guard threw open the door just as I stepped back from the wall. He saw the smoke and lunged. I drove the empty alcohol bottle into his face. Glass burst, he screamed. I ran, down the office stairs, across the catwalk. Boots pounded somewhere below. A bullet cracked metal near my ear. I dropped, slid under a hanging chain, and hit the casting floor hard enough to split skin at my palm. Pain. Iron. Rain blowing in through broken panes. A hand caught the back of my dress. Renato. He spun me into him, one arm banded across my ribs, gun at my throat. You really should have taken the boat. The foundry doors blew inward. Dante entered through smoke and rain with Luca at one side and Teo, God help him, at the other, behind a steel support. White-faced and holding a rifle, like a man who hated every bullet but had loaded them anyway. Everything stopped. Renato's arm tightened. There he is. Dante's gaze landed on the gun at my throat, then on my face. Not panic, not relief. Something far more dangerous, because it was colder than both. Let her go, he said. Renato smiled against my hair. You know I can't. I heard the click then. Dante's lighter. In another moment it would have been absurd. In this one, it sounded like judgment. Flame touched the ragged smoke mark high on the office wall as he flicked his gaze once toward it and understood. He had seen my message. I went limp. Not from fear. From choice. Renato adjusted his grip for 1/2 second, enough to keep me from slipping. It was all I had. I drove my heel down on his instep and dropped straight through the space his arm lost. The gun fired into air. Dante moved at the exact same instant. The first shot hit Renato's shoulder. The second hit the railing behind us as Teo yelled something obscene about workplace safety. Luca took down the man sprinting from the side stair. I hit the ground, rolled, and the world became boots and iron and noise. Then Dante was there. He hauled me up with both hands and checked me in one glance, so fierce it stripped breath from me. Can you stand? Yes. That was all he needed. His forehead touched mine for one impossible fraction of a second. Not a kiss. Worse. Almost. Then he pushed me behind the mold frames and turned back toward the gunfire. I knew, with terrible clarity, that one of us might not survive what came next, and for the first time I knew exactly which possibility would kill me first. The final battle did not happen like stories promise. There was no single duel under clean light. No speech. No moment where everyone understood the shape of the end and arranged themselves nobly around it. There was smoke. Iron dust. Men shouting over machinery that had not worked in 20 years. The wet slap of shoes on the foundry floor. The smell of old oil catching fire where a stray round hit rotted timber. Violence is uglier up close than fear imagines. Less dramatic. More intimate. Dante shoved a spare pistol into my hand. I stared at it. Safety's off, he said. If someone comes through that door who isn't me, Luca, or Teo, you shoot. Then he was gone again, moving through the smoke like a man who had been made in places exactly like this. I crouched behind the mold frames, every nerve trying to crawl out through my skin. Above, the catwalk groaned. Somewhere to my right, Teo shouted, "I did not survive my diet to die in a metallurgy museum," followed by a burst of fire so steady it made me love him a little. A man came through the side door. I shot him. The recoil snapped up my arm and made my teeth strike together. He fell before the sound left the room. I stared for one frozen second, not because I regretted it exactly, but because there are moments when your life divides cleanly into before and after, and your body notices before your mind does. Then another man appeared behind him and Luca bleeding. Impossible, Luca put a bullet through his chest before I had to fire twice. "Don't look at them," Luca said. I looked at him instead, gray around the mouth, one sleeve dark with blood, still upright because perhaps he had never learned another state. "You should be in a hospital. And Teo should be on a stage. We all suffer. Even now, even here." The dry shape of humor that meant he was alive enough to spend it. He jerked his chin toward the rear office. Renato's pulling back. Dante knew it too. I felt it in the shift of the room. Men falling away, noise narrowing. The hunt becoming personal. Then Vittorio Conti emerged from the smoke with a gun in one hand and my father's vellum in the other. He was limping. One side of his suit burned black. His composed mask had finally slipped enough to show something small and ugly under it fury that his careful systems had broken around him. "Elena," he called, "come here." I raised the pistol with both hands. He smiled faintly as if I were an earnest student. "I sold routes, child. I did not shoot your mother." The foundry seemed to hold still around that sentence, not because it absolved him, because it narrowed the world to one fresh horror. "If not you," I said, and my voice sounded very far away. "Who?" "Your father." Vittorio flicked the vellum once. Or rather, the debt he tried to escape. He took ledgers. He warned the wrong people. Your mother died because men came for records and found courage instead. The floor shifted under me. He saw it. Used it. Of course he did. She knew more than he told her, Vittorio went on. So did the younger girl. Children hear everything before adults remember they're in the room. Lucia. Rage hit clean then, not blind. Clarifying. I stepped forward. "You are going to die talking." He almost laughed. A shot cracked from above. Vittorio jerked. Surprise, more than pain, crossed his face as a dark flower spread through his shoulder. He turned. Teo stood on the lower stair, braced against the rail, both hands on the rifle, looking equally horrified and offended by his own competence. "Wow," he said, breathless. "That was deeply against medical advice." Vittorio raised his gun. I fired first. The bullet took him low in the ribs and spun him halfway around. He staggered into a mold frame, still somehow not down. Men like him never believe the world has truly decided against them until it's lying over their shoes. A shape moved behind him. Renato. He came out of the office, bleeding from shoulder and side, eyes fixed not on me, not on Vittorio, but on Dante crossing the floor through smoke and sparks. "Ask him," Renato called. His voice cut through the foundry like a blade laid flat. "Ask him who told him Bianca was already dead." Dante stopped. Everything inside me went cold. Vittorio, on one knee now, smiled through blood. "There it is." Renato laughed once. Broken and bright. I took the message myself. She was alive until dawn, terrified, waiting. He never came because the saint in a suit convinced him the war had to be finished first. Dante's face emptied in a way that frightened me more than anger could have. Not because he believed Renato, because some part of him had always feared it. Vittorio tried to lift his gun toward Dante. Luca shot him through the throat. He died, kneeling. No one spared him a prayer. The room narrowed to the two men left standing in the center of it. Dante and Renato, brother and mirror. Two boys shaped by one absence and one terrible dawn. I looked for you after, Renato said softly. At the harbor. At the church house. At every place boys like us get told to wait while men decide what can be sacrificed. Do you know what I learned? Dante said nothing. That you and I were built for the same thing. Renato lifted his gun with a hand already failing. I just stopped decorating it. He fired. The shot went wide because I moved. I don't remember deciding. Only impact. Dante's shoulder slamming me sideways as the bullet shattered a pulley wheel behind us. Then he was in front of me and Renato was reloading one-handed and the room had no more room left in it for hesitation. Dante shot him once in the chest. Renato looked almost relieved. He dropped to his knees with blood spreading black over black and stared up at the man he might have been if grief had taken one different turn. For her, Renato whispered, whether he meant Bianca or me or every girl men like them had failed, I will never know. Then he fell. The silence after was not really silence. Fire crackled. Men groaned. Rain hissed through broken panes onto hot metal. Tio coughed and announced he had inhaled enough industrial history for one lifetime. But the shape of it had changed. Luca swayed. I was at his side before he hit the floor. No, I said, though there was no logic in it. No, stay with me. He looked down at the blood spreading under him and seemed mildly inconvenienced. I really dislike repeating myself. Luca. His eyes found mine, then Dante's over my shoulder. Something unspoken passed between them, old as loyalty and just as useless against a torn artery. Teach the kid to castle properly, he muttered, which was so specifically for Lucia that it broke me cleanly in half. He died with iron dust on his lashes and one hand still curled like he meant to rise again. I don't know how long I knelt there. At some point Dante pulled me up. At some point Gianna arrived with men and stretchers and a face that went white when she saw Vittorio, and then softer, raw, when she saw Luca. At some point Teo sat down on an overturned crate and cried in total silence, which was more terrible than if he had screamed. Dante stood in the middle of the wrecked foundry with blood on his shirt and his foster brother dead at his feet. The cracked silver lighter was still in his pocket. Somehow that undid me most. He looked at me as if confirming I was real. Then, very quietly, he said, "It is over. War leaves paperwork." That was the first thing no one tells you. Not the films. Not the priests. Not the men who survive by calling brutality necessary and grief the tax on power. But after a foundry burns and bodies cool, and a city begins pretending it did not hear what happened in the hills above it, someone still has to sort records, notify mothers, lock cabinets, and decide which rooms can be lived in again. I was good at sorting ruins. It was the only reason I functioned for the first month. Lucia came home 3 weeks after Renato died, safer, thinner, older around the eyes in a way that made me want to strike the air. She walked through Dante's gate at sunset with Gianna at her side and did not run until she saw me. Then she did. We held each other hard enough to bruise and neither of us apologized. Luca was buried 2 days later in a cemetery above the sea. Lucia cried into Rosa's coat. Teo stood in a black suit that fit too well and muttered through tears that if Luca had any decency at all, he would haunt only men who parked badly and leave the rest of them in peace. Gianna took Teo's hand during the service and did not let go until after the priest had gone. No one mentioned it. Everyone saw. The ledgers my father hid burned through 3 ministries, 2 bishops and 1 Port Authority official before the month ended. Men disappeared. Others came to Dante with lowered eyes and better manners. The house got quieter, not safer. Perhaps that is all victory is in worlds like his a narrower radius of threat. I moved into the old chapel room properly after that. Not as a prisoner. Not as a guest either. Something more dangerous. Chosen. The archives became mine by tacit agreement. Rosa sent up trays without asking. Lucia did her schoolwork at the side table. Dante began leaving damaged papers outside the door with no note. and I began repairing them the way some women answer love letters they cannot yet name. One evening, as rain softened the west terrace to silver, I found him there. He stood with one hand on the stone balustrade and the city spread below like scattered coins. Wind moved through his hair, the scar through his eyebrow caught the last light. He did not turn when I stepped out, which meant he had heard me before the door opened. "Lucia's asleep?" he asked. "With Rosa. They're baking something with too much sugar because Teo said grief lowers blood glucose." Dante's mouth shifted once. "Idiot." He made Jana laugh. "That's how you know he'll survive." I went to stand beside him, not touching, close enough to feel the cool of evening moving between us. For a while we watched Palermo darken. There had been so many almosts between us by then that they had become a language. His hand settling at the small of my back in crowded rooms and leaving before it became anything. My shoulder brushing his in the archive when we both reached for the same ledger. The pause at every threshold, every goodbye, every look held 1 second too long. Restraint had become its own wound. "Why didn't you kiss me in the chapel?" I asked. The question startled me as much as it did him. It had lived under my tongue for weeks, growing teeth. Dante looked out over the city. "Because you were frightened." I was. "And because if I started then, little storm." His voice lowered around the name no longer cold, not yet fully warm. "I wasn't certain I would stop where you needed me to." The honesty in it made my chest ache. I looked down at my hands. "You stop yourself like it costs nothing." "It costs." Silence. Then the lighter clicked. Flame. He lit the cigarette he did not smoke, watched it burn, and crushed it out untouched on the stone. "Almost. Again." I said the only thing that was true enough. I chose to stay. He turned then. "Yes, I saw what it cost. Yes, and I stayed." His gaze dropped to my mouth, then rose again so quickly it hurt more than if he had stared. "I know. I don't know who moved first. Maybe neither of us. Maybe some long-built things simply gave way." I stepped in. He did not retreat. My hands found the front of his shirt and fisted there, not pulling, just needing somewhere to be. I could feel his heartbeat under linen and scar and impossible control. For one suspended second, I thought he might stop us again. Instead, he touched my face as if it were both precious and dangerous. "Tell me no," he said. My throat tightened. This was the cost, not boldness. Exposure. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered. His forehead touched mine. "Neither do I," he lied quietly. I almost laughed, almost cried, almost hid. Instead, I said the thing that felt truest and most terrifying. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of how safe I feel when I shouldn't." Something broke open in his expression then. Not composure. Surrender to tenderness, which may be rarer in men like him. He kissed me. Slow, careful, like the first honest thing either of us had done without defense. There was nothing triumphant in it. No conquest. No heat sharp enough to erase grief, only the unbearable gentleness of something finally allowed to exist. His hand at the nape of my neck, mine trembling against his chest. The city below us. The sea beyond it, every ghost still present and making room. When he drew back, he stayed close. "I have something for you," he said. It was such an absurd sentence after that kiss that I blinked. He reached into his coat and took out a small black box. I stared. "Dante, don't misunderstand me." His voice went very steady, which I was learning meant he was least steady then. "This is not clean. It is not romantic. It is not me asking for a life outside what I am." The box opened. Inside lay a ring. Not enormous, old. Gold warn't soft at the edges. A tiny bell engraved inside the band where no one would see it unless they looked closely. "My mother's," he said. "She wore it after Bianca was born." I could not breathe. "I'm asking," he went on, each word precise as if he were building a bridge one plank at a time, "whether you want to keep choosing this. Me, the house, the danger, the mornings after every ugly thing and the ordinary ones too." Tears came before dignity could stop them. He glanced at them with something like defeat. You see, I did warn you, this wasn't romance. It's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, I whispered. That startled a sound out of him that might have become laughter in an easier life. I held out my hand. When he slid the ring onto my finger, his touch shook once. Barely. Enough. Little storm, he said, and this time the name held no possession in it at all. Only wonder that something fierce had chosen to stay beside him. Below us from an open kitchen window, Tio's voice rose in anguish. Rosa, if this soup has no salt, just kill me honestly. Gianna laughed. Rosa shouted something murderous. Lucia joined in from somewhere unseen. Dante looked toward the sound, then back at me. For the first time, since I had reached his gate in blood and tears, the future did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a room opening. 9 months later, the fortress smelled like oranges, wax, and bread. Not every day. Some mornings it still smelled like rain on gunmetal, and men arriving before dawn with news no one wanted. Dante's world had not turned kind simply because we had survived it. Palermo still belonged partly to shadows. The house still locked from the outside at night. Armed men still stood under saint statues in the courtyard. But ordinary life had begun taking up space anyway, stubborn as weeds through stone. Rosa called it grace and refused further discussion. Lucia called it routine and pretended that made her older than 15. Tio called it a miracle, with pastries. He was getting married in 3 weeks. This remained to him the most shocking development in recorded history. I maintain, he told me solemnly from the kitchen doorway, that Gianna agreed only because nearly dying at the foundry lowered her standards. Gianna, crossing behind him with a tray of cannoli, said no. I agreed because no other man would willingly eat Rosa's experiments and survive to tell me whether they needed more sugar. Rosa smacked Tio lightly with a wooden spoon. He survives on complaints, not on food. I laughed and looked down at the page in front of me. The chapel room was no longer only Dante's archive. It had become mine as well. New shelves stood where broken cabinets once leaned. Restored ledgers sat beside fresh records from the foundation we had quietly built under 3 innocent names. Funds for girls moved through port routes, scholarships, housing, new papers, new lives. Not redemption. There is no such simple thing. Only repair where repair is possible. My hands had gold dust in the lines again. That morning I was mending Lucia's music folio, the one she had carried onto the Malta boat and back. The cover had warped from sea air. One page corner had torn where she admitted, reluctantly and with fury, that she had cried over one piece because it reminded her of our mother. I heard the click from the corridor before I saw him, sharp, metallic, familiar enough now that my body answered before thought did. Dante leaned in the doorway, cracked silver lighter turning once through his fingers, the same lighter that had flared at his gate the night my life split open. The same click that had followed through gunfire, confession, grief, proposal. Once it had sounded like judgment, now it sounded like home. You're late, I said. You're wearing dust. That is not an answer. It's the one you get. He came in anyway, because marriage had not improved his talent for evasion. Not legally marriage, yet our wedding was in 2 months, a small chapel, too many guards. Rosa already threatening bishops, but chosen enough that the word lived between us without needing ceremony to justify it. He set a small paper parcel on the table, lemon biscuits from the bakery below the cathedral. My favorite. He would never say he remembered. He simply kept arriving with them on days that asked too much of me. That look on your face, I said, smiling despite myself, is why children should not be raised by criminals. From the hall, Lucia called. Too late. She appeared a second later with ink on her fingers and sheet music under one arm. Taller now, grief stitched into confidence instead of fear. When thunder rolled over the sea beyond the windows, she did the thing she had done since childhood without noticing. She reached sideways until she found me. Her hand caught mine for 1 second. Reflex. Confirmation. I squeezed back automatically. Across the table, Dante went still. The room held that tiny silence I had learned to hear whenever some old wound and some new tenderness touched the same place in him. There it was again. The why of us. Not beauty. Not fate. Not even danger. A woman half dead at his gate had reached backward through blood and terror until she found a smaller hand first, and months later, in a bright room smelling of paper paste and orange peel, I still did it without thinking. Lucia felt the shift and glanced between us. What? Nothing, Dante said. I knew better. After she left for her lesson with a pianist Rosa distrusted on principle, I rose to shut the balcony doors against the storm. Marble cooled my bare feet. Rain stippled the glass. Behind me the lighter clicked again, softer. When I turned, Dante was watching me with that unreadable calm which no longer fooled me in the slightest. What? I asked. He crossed the room. Slow. No urgency. Which made it worse. At the table, he touched the repaired folio. Then he touched the ring on my finger. Then, with unbearable gentleness, he reached for my hand and turned it palm up. You still do it, he said. My throat tightened. Do what? Choose the other life in the room before your own. The words landed with the full weight of every chapter we had lived through. I looked down at our joined hands. I'm not brave, Dante. I know. His thumb traced the heel of my palm where an old scar from broken glass had gone silver. That's never been the point. The storm rolled closer. Somewhere in the kitchen, Tio yelped because Rosa had caught him stealing cream. Gianna laughed. The house breathed around. A scarred, armed, alive. I thought of the girl who had hit iron at his gate and begged the devil before dawn. I thought of Luca in the cemetery above the sea. Of Bianca, whose ring warmed my hand now. Of my father, flawed and frightened and trying too late. Of the girls in our records beginning new names under safer roofs. Nothing erased what this life cost. That was part of choosing it honestly. Dante lifted my hand to his mouth and kissed the center of my palm. A simple touch. Warm, revenant, the kind of gesture that would have terrified the man who first opened his gate to me. Little storm, he said, and now the name held all of its possessions survived into tenderness. Danger settled into devotion. The whole shape of us in 2 words. Outside, lightning lit the sea white. Inside, he flicked the lighter open and touched the flame to the candle waiting on the desk for evening work. Gold light rose between us, small and steady. The first time I saw that flame, I thought it meant judgment. I had been wrong. It meant witness. So here is the question I still can't answer cleanly, even now. Even loved like this. If choosing the man who saves you means choosing the darkness that made him, would you still take his hand and let the safer version of your life die?